UK, Canada, Australia recognize Palestine as a state, breaking with US. Britain, Canada, and Australia formally recognized a state of Palestine on Sunday, reversing decades of unwillingness to accept Palestinians as a sovereign nation until their conflict with Israel was permanently settled and breaking sharply with the United States. The three nations became the biggest countries to recognize a Palestinian state, acting in coordination with France, which is expected to make a similar declaration on Monday at the United Nations. Later Sunday, Portuguese Foreign Minister Paulo Rangel announced from the UN that his country was also formally recognizing a Palestinian state. Their embrace of Palestinian statehood is a momentous shift in long-standing diplomatic positions and reflects the grave consternation in many capitals over Israel's war in Gaza. Britain, Canada, and France, the first members of the group of 7 major economies to take such a step, are some of the biggest traditional Israel supporters and U.S. allies to recognize a Palestinian state. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced the decisions in rapid succession Sunday. Starmer, in particular, has faced growing pressure from the British public and his own Labour Party to take a tougher stand against Israel's conduct in Gaza. The Sunday announcements were made a day before the start of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, on Monday evening, and seemed timed, at least in part, to avoid issuing statements certain to anger the Israeli government as the country prepared for a major holiday. The anger from Israel arrived swiftly. A Palestinian state will not be established, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement. It will not happen. He accused those leaders who recognize a Palestinian state of giving a huge reward to terror, and said Israel's response would come after his upcoming trip to the United States. Wait for it, he added. The growing list of nations recognizing a Palestinian state reflects how the bloodshed and upheaval following the October 7, 2023, Hamas attacks on Israel have shaken up long static diplomatic positions. Britain's shift has special resonance given its controversial history governing what is now Israel and the Palestinian territories in the early 20th century under a mandate from the League of Nations, after making what critics say were unclear and contradictory promises to Arabs and Jews in the region. Britain has long urged the sides to negotiate an agreement that establishes 2 sovereign states in the still contested area, but it held off recognizing a state of Palestine in advance of a settlement. But growing public outrage over Israel's siege in Gaza and its recent steps away from a negotiated settlement pushed the UK government to act. Huge demonstrations in support of Palestinians routinely fill streets in cities across Britain. More than 1/3 of Starmer's cabinet had called for the move, and more than 130 members of parliament from his Labour Party signed a recent letter in support. Starmer promised in July that he would make the move before the UN's General Assembly meeting in September unless Israel took substantive steps to improve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israeli attacks have killed more than 65,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials, who do not differentiate between civilian and combatant casualties, but say the majority of the dead are women and children. Starmer said he would recognize a state of Palestine unless Israel agreed to a ceasefire deal with Hamas, committed to a 2-state solution, and ruled out annexing the occupied West Bank. None of those conditions were met, British officials said. Rather, in recent weeks, Israel has renewed its assault on Gaza City and launched an attack targeting Hamas officials in Doha, Qatar, the U.S. ally hosting ceasefire negotiations. In a statement, Hamas described the announcements as an important step in maintaining the right of our Palestinian people to their land and holy sites, and to establishing their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. The group also said recognition must be accompanied by practical measures that immediately halt Israel's war in Gaza and confront Israeli plans to annex the West Bank. Israel, along with President Donald Trump and numerous other administration officials, has blasted the growing movement of governments that recognize a state of Palestine as rewarding Hamas for the militant group's surprise October 2023 attacks that killed about 1,200 Israelis and displaced tens of thousands more. Starmer rejected that criticism. This solution is not a reward for Hamas. Our call for a genuine two-state solution is the exact opposite of Hamas's hateful vision, Starmer said Sunday. Britain's announcement, though expected, provided a striking coda to Trump's pomp and comedy-filled state visit that concluded Thursday evening. The Prime Minister, speaking beside Trump at a news conference Thursday, said accepting Palestine as a state was needed to address the intolerable destruction and deprivation in Gaza and to steer the broader conflict back toward a sustainable long-term settlement. The issue was the only major point of disagreement to emerge publicly during the carefully choreographed two-day visit. At the news conference, Trump acknowledged a disagreement with the Prime Minister on that score, but in less harsh language than that of some of his senior aides or Netanyahu, who had accused Starmer of appeasing Hamas. A jihadist state on Israel's border today will threaten Britain tomorrow, Netanyahu said in a statement on X. Starmer said the move should be seen as part of that overall package, which hopefully takes us from the appalling situation we're in now to the outcome of a safe and secure Israel, which we do not have, and a viable Palestinian state. Starmer denied that recognizing statehood for more than 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza was a reward for Hamas. He condemned the group as a terrorist organization who can have no part in any future governance in Palestine. In response to that, Trump patted him on the back approvingly, suggesting Britain's position would not cause a significant conflict with Washington. Politicians from across the British political spectrum have condemned Israel's actions in Gaza, but Starmer's move to recognize a Palestinian state was criticized by some conservatives. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Tory party, accused the Prime Minister of moral confusion. It sends a signal to terrorists and tyrants alike that Britain no longer knows which way it is going, Badenoch wrote in the Telegraph newspaper Saturday. More than 140 countries already recognize Palestinian statehood, and the UN granted the governing Palestinian Authority non-member observer status in 2012. The moves by Britain, France, Canada, and Australia will not amount to a promotion to full nationhood within the world body. However, that elevation would still depend on a vote in the UN Security Council, where the United States remains ready to veto such proposals. The U.S. blocked for the sixth time Thursday a resolution supported by all 14 other Security Council members that called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages, saying the measure failed to sufficiently condemn Hamas or recognize Israel's right to defend itself. The value in the momentum toward statehood remains, for now, symbolic, said Yossi Mekelberg, a senior fellow at Chatham House, a London think tank, unless followed by additional specific attempts to pressure Israel, such as limiting arms sales, imposing sanctions on individuals and organizations, or restricting trade. The recognition will probably further isolate the Jewish state, but not sway its right-wing government, Mekelberg said. This is changing the dynamic. It's adding to the momentum, he said, but it will make very little difference if it's not followed by concrete steps. Palestinians hailed Britain's move. The Palestinian mission in London said it was planning to hold a flag-raising ceremony Monday at its small office in the Hammersmith neighborhood, attended by Palestinian and British officials. The flag has flown at the site for years, but now will fly over a building considered an embassy by its host government. Diana Buttu, a Palestinian human rights lawyer and one-time advisor to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, said the recognition was welcome but lamented that it came only after the destruction in Gaza had reached such critical levels. Everyone is focused on recognizing Palestine while Gaza is being erased, Buttu said. The Palestinians' growing status as a recognized nation could help clarify the conflict in the international community, she said. It's not just Israel occupying the territories, it's a state occupying another state, she said. That was the dynamic when Iraq invaded Kuwait, she noted, spurring a massive international response on the grounds of violated sovereignty. Britain, additionally, had a special responsibility to recognize Palestinian statehood given its historic role, Buttu said. The British Balfour Declaration of 1917 had been one of the first and most consequential calls for a Jewish homeland to be carved out of the Mandate territories. And many of the laws that Israel still uses to detain Palestinians without judicial oversight date to the British Mandate period, she said. Given that the British were the ones who gave away Palestine, this recognition is powerful. But is said. But it's not enough.